The iron gate of Dominic's estate slid open with that familiar mechanical hum, and I felt my shoulders drop just slightly. 32 days. That's how long it had been since I'd heard my eldest son's voice. 32 nights of replaying every conversation we'd ever had, searching for the moment I'd failed him so completely that he'd choose silence over his own mother. The text message had arrived 3 days ago. Simple, almost sterile. Mom, dinner Friday at 7. We need to talk. No warmth. No, I've missed you, or let's catch up. Just a summons, really. But it was something. It was a bridge, however fragile, and I was desperate enough to cross it. My Mercedes crunched over the gravel driveway as I approached the main house. The October evening was settling into that particular New England darkness that comes early and stays late. I dressed carefully for this dinner. My navy Armani blazer, the pearl earrings Dominic gave me for my 50th birthday, subtle makeup that I hoped disguised how poorly I'd been sleeping. I wanted him to see that I was fine, that his silence hadn't broken me, even though we both would have known it was a lie. But something felt wrong the moment I turned into the circular driveway. There were too many cars. A black Lexus I didn't recognize. 2 SUVs parked near the garden entrance. A BMW sedan that looked like it belonged to someone who spent their weekends at country clubs. Dominic and Vanessa typically kept Friday nights quiet, especially now with her pregnancy so far along. Why would they have guests tonight when we were supposed to talk? I parked near the front entrance, my hands gripping the steering wheel for just a moment longer than necessary. The house lights were on. Every window seemed to glow with that warm amber light that usually made the place feel welcoming. But tonight, it felt like a stage, like something was on display. I shook off the feeling. This was my son's home. My grandchild would be born here in just 2 months. I was being paranoid. I grabbed my purse and opened the car door. The evening air was crisp, carrying that smell of wood smoke from someone's fireplace in the neighborhood. Normal. Everything should have felt normal. That's when Rosa appeared. She came running from the side of the house, her white uniform somehow still pristine despite the way she was moving. Fast, desperate, her sensible shoes slapping against the stone pathway. Rosa had worked for Dominic and Vanessa for 3 years. I'd always liked her. She was professional, warm in that quiet way that made you feel seen without being intrusive. Filipino, mid-40s, always impeccably dressed and unflappable. I'd never seen her move with anything other than calm efficiency. But this Rosa was terrified. "Señora!" she called out, her accent thicker than usual, which I'd learned only happened when she was upset. "Señora Roderfood!" She reached me before I'd taken 3 steps from my car, her hand closing around my forearm with surprising strength. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated in the dusk light. She was breathing hard. "Rosa," I said, alarmed. "What's wrong? Is it Vanessa? The baby?" No, she gasped, pulling me slightly away from the house, toward the shadows of the garden wall. "You cannot go in there. Please, you must listen to me." My heart was hammering now. "What are you talking about? Dominic invited me to dinner. We're supposed to—" "It is a trap," Rosa interrupted. Something she had never done in all the years I'd known her. Her fingers dug into my arm. "Señora, please, you do not know what he is capable of. What they have planned for you tonight." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Dominic? My Dominic? Rosa, that's impossible. He's my son. He would never—" "I heard them," she said, her voice dropping to an urgent whisper. 3 days ago, after he sent the message to you, he was in his office with Señora Vanessa. They were planning something. There are people inside waiting for you, people you do not know. He wants to—" She struggled with the English for a moment. "To humiliate you. In front of everyone." The word humiliate hit me like a physical blow. I stared at this woman who had never given me reason to doubt her, whose face was now twisted with genuine fear and something else. Pity. She pitied me. "Rosa, I don't understand. Why would my son want to humiliate me?" Her eyes filled with tears. "I do not know all of it, but I know it has something to do with your ex-husband, with Mr. Richard, with money and people he hurt. Señora Vanessa's parents are inside. And many others. They are very angry. I heard Dominic saying terrible things about you, things I know cannot be true, but he believes them. And tonight, he wants to make you confess something in front of all these people. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of her words. Richard, my ex-husband who had died 6 months ago. What did he have to do with anything? Richard and I had been divorced for 8 years. Whatever sins he'd committed, whatever chaos he'd created, I'd thought I was finally free of it when his lawyer called to tell me about the heart attack. But looking at Rosa's face, at the genuine terror there, I realized I'd been wrong. Richard's shadow was apparently longer and darker than I'd ever imagined. What should I do? I heard myself ask, my voice sounding distant and strange. Flee, Rosa said simply. Go now, as fast as possible. Do not let them do this to you. Whatever your son thinks you did, this is not the way. This will destroy everything. Behind us, I heard the front door of the house open. A rectangle of light spilled across the driveway. Voices, multiple voices, drifted out into the evening air. Mom? Dominic's voice. But it wasn't the warm voice I remembered from his childhood, or even the cooler, more distant voice of the past few years. This voice was hard, controlled, angry. Mom, are you out here? Everyone's waiting. Rosa's grip on my arm tightened. Go, she whispered. Please. Some instinct I didn't even know I possessed took over. Maybe it was the way Dominic said, everyone's waiting, like I was late to my own execution. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in Rosa's eyes. Maybe it was just the survival instinct that had gotten me through a difficult childhood, a failing marriage, and the rebuilding of my entire life at 50. I pulled away from Rosa, spun on my heel, and ran back to my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key fob to work. Behind me, I heard Dominic's footsteps on the gravel, moving faster now. Mom, what the hell? Get back here. The car door opened. I threw myself inside, jabbed the start button. The engine purred to life. In my rearview mirror, I could see Dominic standing in the driveway now, his face illuminated by the house lights. He looked thin, too thin. Had he lost weight? When had that happened? And his expression, it was something I'd never seen directed at me before. Pure fury. I threw the car into reverse, backed out of the circular driveway too fast, heard the tires squeal. Dominic was moving toward me, one hand raised. Whether to stop me or to reach for the door handle, I couldn't tell. For one terrible moment, our eyes met through the windshield. My son, my beautiful boy, who I'd carried for 9 months, who'd learned to read sitting on my lap, who'd called me crying when his first girlfriend broke his heart at 16, looking at me like I was his enemy. Then I was through the gate, accelerating onto the tree-lined street that led away from his house, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be having a heart attack myself. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I made it 3 blocks before I had to pull over. My whole body was shaking. I couldn't catch my breath. What had just happened? What had I just run from? My phone started ringing. Dominic. I stared at his name on the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I couldn't do it. I couldn't hear whatever he was going to say to me right now. The call went to voicemail. Immediately, a text message arrived. Then another. Then another. My phone started buzzing continuously, message after message flooding in. I looked down at the screen with growing horror. How dare you run away like a coward? You owe these people an explanation. Did you really think you could hide what you did forever? Everyone knows what you are now. You protected a criminal and let innocent people suffer. I can't believe you're my mother. The messages kept coming. 47 in total by the time they stopped 3 minutes after I'd fled his driveway. 47 messages from my eldest child, each one more devastating than the last. Many of them made no sense. What criminal had I protected? What innocent people? What was I supposedly hiding? But one message, buried in the middle of that avalanche of rage, made my blood run cold. Dad left me everything, Mom. Every document, every bank statement, every email, every secret you thought you buried. I know exactly what you did. And after tonight, everyone else will too. My hands were still trembling as I sat in my car on that quiet residential street, while inside my son's house, apparently a room full of people waited to hear me confess to crimes I didn't understand. And somewhere in that house, in an office or a safe or a drawer, were documents that Richard had left behind. Documents that my son believed proved I was a monster. I'd thought the divorce was the worst thing Richard could ever do to me. I'd thought his death had finally closed that chapter of my life. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, watching my phone light up with my son's hatred, I realized that Richard had saved his cruelest trick for last. He'd weaponized our child against me from beyond the grave, and I had absolutely no idea why. I didn't drive home that night. I couldn't. Instead, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner off Route 1, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tastes like it's been sitting since the morning shift. I needed somewhere bright and public and anonymous, somewhere I could think without the walls of my empty house closing in on me. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 30s with a name tag that said Brenda, brought me coffee I didn't drink and a menu I didn't open. I just sat there, staring at my phone, reading and rereading those 47 messages until the words stopped making sense. I needed to understand how I'd gotten here, how the son who used to bring me dandelions from the garden and call them flowers had turned into someone capable of that kind of cruelty. So I forced myself to go back, to remember. Richard and I met when I was 26 years old. He was 32, charming, ambitious, working in commercial real estate development. I was fresh out of business school, just starting my career in financial consulting. We met at a charity gala in Boston, one of those black tie affairs where young professionals go to network and pretend they care about whatever cause is being celebrated. He made me laugh. That was what I remembered most. In a room full of people trying to impress each other, Richard made me laugh. We married 14 months later. Dominic was born 2 years after that, and Miranda came along 4 years later. For a long time, we were happy. Or at least, I thought we were happy. Richard's business grew. My consultancy grew. We bought the house in Greenwich when Dominic was 7. We took family vacations to Martha's Vineyard every summer. We hosted dinner parties. We looked, from the outside, like we had it all figured out. I should have seen the cracks forming earlier, but I was busy building my career, raising 2 children, managing a household, and Richard was good at hiding things. That was a skill I didn't appreciate until much later. The first real sign came about 15 years into our marriage. Richard started talking about a new investment opportunity. He'd always had side projects, real estate deals, startup investments, ventures with college friends who had more ambition than sense. Most of them were harmless. Some even made money. But this one was different. He was secretive about it, defensive when I asked questions. "It's complicated," he'd say. "You wouldn't understand the commercial real estate side of things," which was insulting, given that I'd built my entire career on understanding complex financial structures. But I let it go. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. The second mistake was not pressing harder when I started noticing irregularities in our personal finances. Money moving between accounts in ways that didn't make sense. Large withdrawals that Richard explained away as business expenses or investment opportunities. I was making good money by then. My consultancy was grossing over $2 million a year, so the amounts didn't alarm me. We could afford his ventures even if they failed. What I didn't know was that Richard wasn't just investing our money. He was investing other people's money too. Lots of other people. The truth came out on a Tuesday afternoon in March, 13 years ago. I was 51 years old. Dominic was 26 and working in New York. Miranda was 22, just finishing her design degree in California. I was in my home office, reviewing a client proposal, when our accountant called. "Samantha," he said, and I could hear the strain in his voice immediately. "We need to talk about Richard's accounts. Some things aren't adding up." That conversation led to another, with our lawyer, then another, with a forensic accountant. Within a week, I understood what my husband had been doing for the past 7 years. Richard had been running what essentially amounted to a Ponzi scheme. Not on a massive scale. He wasn't Bernie Madoff, but he'd been taking investments from friends, colleagues, acquaintances, promising them incredible returns on commercial real estate developments that either didn't exist or were nowhere near as profitable as he claimed. He'd been using new investors' money to pay returns to old investors. And when the whole thing started to collapse, he'd been dipping into our personal accounts to keep the illusion alive. The forensic accountant estimated that Richard had defrauded approximately 40 investors out of roughly $8 million total. Some had lost tens of thousands. Others had lost hundreds of thousands. Many of them were people we knew, people who'd come to our dinner parties, people whose children had played with our children. I was devastated, humiliated, furious. But I was also terrified. If this became public, it wouldn't just destroy Richard, it would destroy our children's names. Dominic was just starting his career in real estate investment. Having a father publicly exposed as a fraud would ruin him. Miranda was trying to break into high-end interior design, where reputation was everything. So I made a choice. Maybe it was the wrong choice. Maybe it was the cowardly choice. But it was the choice I made. I hired the most aggressive lawyer I could find. I liquidated assets. I called in favors. And over the course of 6 months, I quietly paid out $2.3 million to 28 of Richard's victims. Not all of them. My lawyer could only identify the ones who'd left paper trails, who'd made complaints, who could prove their losses. Each settlement came with a non-disclosure agreement. They got their money back, and in exchange, they agreed to never speak publicly about what Richard had done. I protected the Roterfood name. I protected my children from the shame their father had earned. And yes, I protected myself from being associated with a criminal, even though I'd had no knowledge of his schemes. But the cost was enormous. Not just financially, though that hurt. The cost was my marriage. I couldn't look at Richard the same way after that. Every time he tried to explain, to apologize, to promise he'd never do anything like that again, all I could see was the man who'd been willing to destroy dozens of families for his own ego and greed. We divorced 3 years later. I told the children it was because we'd grown apart, because the spark was gone, because sometimes marriages just run their course. They were adults by then. Dominic was 29, Miranda was 25. Old enough to accept that their parents weren't in love anymore without digging too deep into the reasons why. Dominic took it harder than Miranda. He'd always been closer to his father. They'd bonded over business and sports and all those father-son things that I could never quite be part of. He was angry with me for years, though he'd never quite say it directly. Just this coolness, this distance, like he blamed me for breaking up the family, even if he couldn't articulate why. Miranda understood better. Maybe because she was younger. Maybe because she'd always been more intuitive. She'd seen the tension between Richard and me long before the divorce papers were filed. She'd asked me once, about a year after the separation, if Dad had done something unforgivable. I'd told her that marriage was complicated and left it at that. Richard moved to Florida after the divorce, bought a condo in Miami with money I didn't ask about. He maintained a relationship with both kids, though I knew Dominic saw him more often. They'd meet up for golf, for business conferences, for those father-son weekends that I told myself I was fine with. And then, 6 months ago, Richard died. Massive heart attack in his condo. He was 69 years old. Dominic flew down to handle the arrangements. Miranda and I attended the funeral, a small affair with maybe 20 people, which felt appropriate for a man who'd spent the last years of his life in relative isolation. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I was finally free of Richard and his secrets and his lies. But sitting in that diner, reading my son's messages about documents and bank statements and emails, I realized that Richard had left one final bomb behind. Something in his estate, in his papers, in whatever he'd left to Dominic. Something that had turned my son against me so completely that he'd planned an ambush to humiliate me in front of strangers. The worst part was that I had no idea what it was. What had Richard told him? What evidence had he manufactured? What version of our history had he crafted to make me look like the villain? I picked up my phone and opened my messages to Miranda. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What would I even say? Your brother tried to ambush me at dinner and I ran away? Your father apparently left documents that prove I'm a terrible person? Instead, I just typed, "Can you call me when you get a chance? Need to talk about Dominic." Then I sat back in that cracked vinyl booth, surrounded by the smell of burnt coffee and fried food, and waited for my daughter to tell me if I still had any family left at all. Miranda called me at 7:30 the next morning. I was still at the diner, though I'd moved from coffee to water somewhere around 3 a.m. I hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dominic's face in that driveway, twisted with anger I didn't understand. "Mom?" Miranda's voice was thick with sleep and 3,000 miles of distance. "What's going on? Your text scared me." I didn't know where to start, so I just started talking. I told her about the dinner invitation, about Rosa's warning, about running from Dominic's house like a criminal fleeing a crime scene, about the 47 messages that I'd now memorized, each word carved into my memory like a scar. There was a long silence when I finished. Then Miranda said very quietly, "He hasn't been answering my calls either." "What?" "For about 2 weeks now. I thought he was just busy with work and getting ready for the baby. But Mom, 2 weeks ago was right after Dad's estate finished going through probate." My stomach dropped. What was in the estate? "I don't know exactly. Dominic was the executor. He handled everything. I got a small bequest, $20,000. But Dominic got the bulk of it. The condo sold for about $400,000. There were some other assets, and apparently boxes of personal papers that Dad specified should go to Dominic only. Boxes of personal papers, documents, bank statements, emails, everything my son had mentioned in his messages. Miranda, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Did your brother say anything to you about me after going through those papers? Anything about your father and me? About the divorce?" Another long pause. "He asked me once if I knew the real reason you and Dad split up. I told him what you always told us, that you'd grown apart. He said something strange then. He said, 'That's what I thought too.' Turns out we were both wrong." I closed my eyes. "He knows about the fraud." "What fraud?" Of course, Miranda had been in California, finishing school, living her own life when everything fell apart. She'd been 22, too far away to notice the signs, too young for me to burden with the ugly truth. I'd protected her from it, just like I'd protected Dominic. So I told her, all of it. The investments that weren't investments. The scheme that had stolen money from dozens of people. The 6 months I'd spent cleaning up Richard's mess, paying back victims, buying silence to protect our family name. The real reason the marriage had ended. When I finished, Miranda was crying. "Oh, Mom, all these years I thought you just fell out of love with him. I thought you were the one who gave up on the marriage. I let you think that because it was easier than explaining that your father was a criminal. Does Dominic know? I mean, did you ever tell him?" "No. I thought I was protecting him. He was so close to your father. I didn't want to destroy that relationship. I thought I could carry the secret alone. But now Dad's told him anyway. His version of the story." Miranda's voice hardened with understanding. "And if Dad was anything like I'm starting to realize he was, his version probably made him look like the victim and you look like the monster." She was right. Of course she was right. Richard had been a master at spinning narratives, at making himself the hero of every story. Why would his confession to our son be any different? "Miranda, I need you to do something for me. I need you to try to reach Dominic. Maybe he'll answer for you. Tell him I want to talk. Tell him I can explain everything. Just please, get him to talk to me." "I'll try," she said. "But Mom, whatever he thinks you did, whatever Dad told him, you know I'm on your side, right?" Those words, simple as they were, made me cry for the first time since fleeing Dominic's house. "Thank you, baby. I love you. We'll fix this." But after we hung up, I wasn't so sure. How do you fix a relationship when someone believes the worst about you? When they've been given evidence, however distorted, that confirms every suspicion they've ever harbored. I checked into a hotel that morning. I couldn't face going home yet, facing the silence of that big house in Greenwich where I'd raised my children and buried my marriage. Instead, I got a room at a Marriott near the highway and finally slept for 4 hours of restless, nightmare-laden unconsciousness. When I woke up in the afternoon, there were 17 new messages, but this time they weren't from Dominic. They were from Vanessa. "Samantha, we need to talk about what you did to my family. You knew what Richard did and you covered it up. My parents lost everything because of your husband and you just wrote checks to keep it quiet. $400,000. That was my parents' entire life savings. They built that laundry business from nothing. They worked 18-hour days for 30 years. And your husband stole it all, and you knew." I stared at those messages, my mind racing. The Chen family, Vanessa's parents. They'd had a laundry business. I vaguely remembered meeting them at Dominic and Vanessa's wedding 5 years ago. A sweet couple in their 60s, proud of their daughter who'd become a lawyer, gracious and warm. But I had never known they were among Richard's victims. They hadn't been on the list my forensic accountant had compiled. There'd been no complaint filed, no paper trail that led back to them. My hands shaking, I called the lawyer who'd handled the settlements 13 years ago. Martin Greenberg, now in his 70s, but still practicing. He picked up on the third ring. Samantha Roderfood. It's been a long time. Martin, I need you to pull the files from the Richard situation, all the victim documentation. I need to know if the Chen family was on that list. I could hear him typing. Chen. Spell that for me? Chen. They owned a laundry business. Lost about 400,000. More typing. Then silence. Samantha, there's no Chen family in these files. If they lost money to Richard, they never filed a complaint. They weren't part of the settlement process. How is that possible? If Richard took their money, how would we not know? You have to remember, we only knew about the victims who came forward. Who threatened legal action? Who made noise? If the Chen family stayed quiet, maybe they were embarrassed. Maybe they didn't understand they had legal recourse. Maybe Richard convinced them not to. They wouldn't have been on our radar. I felt sick. So there could be others? Other people Richard stole from who never came forward? Almost certainly. We estimated he'd defrauded people out of about 8 million total, based on the money movements we could track. But we only identified and compensated about 28 victims for approximately 3 million. There was always money unaccounted for. After I hung up with Martin, I just sat on the hotel bed for a long time. All these years, I'd told myself I'd done the right thing. I'd paid back the victims. I'd made amends for Richard's sins. But I'd only paid back the victims I could find, the ones who'd made noise, the ones who'd demanded justice. How many others had there been? How many families like the Chens had lost their life savings and suffered in silence? My phone rang. Miranda. Mom, I got through to him. Thank God. What did he say? He said, her voice broke slightly. He said you're not welcome in his life until you publicly acknowledge what you did. He said you knew Dad was defrauding people and you helped cover it up to protect your reputation. He said you paid off some victims, but left others to suffer. He said you chose your image over other people's lives. That's not what happened. I didn't know about the fraud until it was already falling apart. I paid everyone I could find. I didn't leave anyone to suffer intentionally. I told him that. I told him there had to be another explanation. He said Dad left him proof, bank records showing you moving money, emails between you and your lawyer, documents showing you knew which victims were being compensated and which weren't. He said there's evidence you specifically chose not to compensate Vanessa's family even though you knew about them. That's impossible. I never knew about the Chens. Then how did Dad have documentation suggesting you did? That was the question, wasn't it? How had Richard manufactured evidence of my knowledge? Or had he? Maybe there was something in those old files, some ambiguous email or document that could be interpreted as evidence if you wanted to believe the worst. Miranda, what else did he say? He said that dinner last night was supposed to be a chance for you to come clean. He'd invited some of Dad's victims, including Vanessa's parents. He wanted you to face them, to admit what you'd done, to apologize. And when Rosa warned you and you ran, it just confirmed everything he believed about you. I ran because Rosa said he wanted to humiliate me, that it was a trap. He says it wasn't a trap. He says it was an opportunity for accountability that you refused to take. I wanted to scream. How had this happened? How had I become the villain in a story where I'd been trying to do damage control, where I'd spent millions of my own money trying to make things right? Did you tell him I want to talk to him? He said he's done talking. He said the only conversation he wants to have with you is in front of the people Dad hurt. He said, if you want a relationship with him or with your grandchild, you need to face what you did. My grandchild. The baby that was due in less than 2 months. The thought that I might never hold that child, never be part of their life, made my chest physically ache. Miranda, I don't know what to do. Come to LA, she said immediately. Come stay with me for a few days. Get away from all this. We'll figure it out together. I can't run away. You're not running away. You're regrouping. Mom, you sound like you haven't slept in days. You need to take care of yourself before you can fix this. She was right, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. Not while Dominic was this angry. Not while there were documents out there painting me as some kind of monster. I need to see those papers, I said. Whatever Richard left him. I need to know what evidence he thinks he has. He's not going to show them to you. Then I need to find another way. After I hung up with Miranda, I did something I'm not proud of. I called a private investigator. His name was James McCarthy, and I'd used him years ago for background checks on potential business partners. He was expensive, discreet, and very good at finding information people wanted to keep hidden. "Mrs. Roderfood," he said when he answered. "Long time. I need you to look into something for me. My ex-husband's estate, specifically, documents that were left to my son. That could be tricky. Estate documents are usually private. I'm not asking you to steal anything. I just need to know what's in them, what they say about me. I'll see what I can do." While I waited for McCarthy to get back to me, I spent 3 days in that hotel room, ordering room service I barely touched, watching mindless television, and refreshing my phone every 5 minutes, hoping for a message from Dominic that never came. Vanessa messaged me twice more. Once to tell me that her parents had spent the last 13 years rebuilding their business from nothing after Richard destroyed them. Once to tell me that my son was barely sleeping, barely eating, consumed with rage at my betrayal. "You did this to him," she wrote. "You and your lies. He's falling apart, and it's your fault." On the 4th day, McCarthy called. "I've got some information for you. You're not going to like it. Tell me." Your ex-husband kept meticulous records. Everything about the fraud, the victims, the money. And yes, there are documents that suggest you had more knowledge than you've indicated. Emails between you and your lawyer discussing which victims to prioritize. A spreadsheet with names and amounts, including a Chen family listed for $400,000 marked "Do Not Contact." The room tilted. "That's impossible. I never saw any spreadsheet like that. The metadata suggests it was created on your home computer. Your email address is on it." "James, I'm telling you, I never created that document. I never saw a list with the Chen family on it. Then someone else created it using your credentials. The question is who and why?" Richard. It had to be Richard. He'd created false evidence, planted it in our shared files, made it look like I'd deliberately chosen to exclude certain victims. But why? What did he gain from making me look complicit in his crimes? Unless it was insurance. Unless he thought that if I looked guilty too, I'd be less likely to turn him in. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe Richard, facing the collapse of everything he'd built, couldn't stand to be the only villain in the story. So he'd made me one too. "What else is in those documents?" I asked McCarthy. "Bank records showing transfers you made for the settlements. Nothing incriminating there. You were clearly trying to compensate victims. But there are also emails that could be interpreted as you trying to keep the fraud quiet to protect your social standing. Your lawyer advising you about reputation management, about non-disclosure agreements, about minimizing public exposure. Because I was trying to protect my children from the shame of having a criminal father. I believe you. But if someone wanted to read those emails in the worst possible light, they could make a case that you were more concerned with protecting your image than helping victims." After McCarthy sent me his full report, I sat with it for hours, reading every page, looking at the evidence through Dominic's eyes. And I had to admit, if you didn't know my intentions, if you didn't understand my motivations, if you believed your father over your mother, it did look damning. It looked like I'd known about the fraud from the beginning, like I'd helped decide which victims to pay off and which to ignore, like I'd prioritized rich, connected victims who might make trouble while leaving poorer, quieter victims like the Chen family to suffer. It wasn't true, but I could see how Dominic, grieving his father, angry at me for the divorce, influenced by a pregnant wife whose parents were among the victims, could believe it was true. The question was, how did I prove it wasn't? The answer came from the most unexpected source. It was 2:00 in the morning, 12 days after I'd fled Dominic's driveway, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I'd been lying awake in my hotel room. I'd extended my stay indefinitely, unable to face going home, staring at the ceiling and replaying every conversation I'd ever had with my son, searching for the moment I'd lost him. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mrs. Roderfood?" A woman's voice, heavily accented, hesitant. "This is she. It is Rosa. Rosa Delgado. I am calling from a friend's phone. I hope this is okay." I sat up immediately. "Rosa, of course. Are you all right?" Her voice broke slightly. "I was fired 4 days ago. Mrs. Vanessa said I betrayed the family by warning you. She said I am not trustworthy. I'm so sorry. Rosa, this is my fault. If you need help finding another position, I can make calls. I can provide references. That is kind, but that is not why I am calling. She took a breath. Before Mrs. Vanessa made me leave, I found something in Mr. Dominic's office. I took pictures with my phone because I thought maybe you should see. My heart started racing. What kind of something? Papers, documents from his father, but not just the ones Mr. Dominic has been showing everyone. There were other papers, hidden in a folder marked "Do Not Show Vanessa." But I only found them because I was cleaning under his desk and the folder fell. Mrs. Roderfood, there are bank statements in there, from the Cayman Islands, from an account in Mr. Richard's name, with very much money still in it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. How much money? $1.2 million. The last statement is dated 4 days before Mr. Richard died. $1.2 million, hidden in an offshore account. Money that had never been part of the estate inventory, money that had never been disclosed to the courts or distributed to creditors or victims. Rosa, are you absolutely sure about this? I have the pictures. I can send them to you. But Mrs. Roderfood, there is something else. There is a letter from Mr. Richard to Mr. Dominic. It says, I could hear paper rustling like she was reading from notes. It says, "Son, this money is what remains from the investments. I kept it hidden because your mother would have given it all away to those people who came after me. She never understood that business sometimes requires difficult choices. This is your inheritance. Use it to build something better than I did. Don't let her guilt make you weak." I closed my eyes. There it was. Richard's final manipulation, painting me as the soft-hearted fool who'd given away money that rightfully belonged to our son, making himself look like the pragmatic businessman who'd protected Dominic's inheritance from my bleeding heart. When did Dominic get this letter? I do not know exactly, but the folder, it looks old, like maybe he has had it for some weeks, since the estate was settled, which meant Dominic had known about this money for weeks, had known there was $1.2 million that could have been used to compensate the remaining victims, including Vanessa's parents, and he'd kept it hidden, while planning to publicly shame me for not doing enough to help those same victims. Rosa, I need you to send me those pictures, all of them. Can you do that? Yes. But Mrs. Roderfood, you should know. Mr. Dominic is not well. I have worked for the family for 3 years, and I have never seen him like this. He does not sleep. He barely eats. Mrs. Vanessa, she says he is having a mental crisis, but she does not stop him from planning these things against you. She encourages him. She says you deserve to suffer like her parents suffered. Is Vanessa okay? The baby? Even after everything, I still cared. She was carrying my grandchild. The baby is healthy. But Mrs. Vanessa, she is very angry all the time. The pregnancy is high risk, and she is on bed rest. But instead of resting, she spends all day on the phone with her parents, with lawyers, planning what they will do to you. It is not good for the baby, all this stress. After Rosa hung up, after promising to send the pictures from a secure email account, I sat in the dark hotel room trying to process what I'd just learned. My son had access to money that could have solved the very problem he was blaming me for. Money his father had stolen and hidden. Money that Richard had explicitly told him to keep from me, and Dominic had chosen to keep it, while destroying our relationship over my alleged failure to compensate all the victims. The hypocrisy of it was staggering. But what broke my heart even more was the realization that Dominic had been so desperate to believe his father's narrative, so willing to see me as the villain, that he'd ignored evidence that contradicted that story. Or worse, he'd rationalized it, convinced himself that Richard's hidden money was different from the settlements I'd made, that he had a right to that inheritance even if it came from fraud. 20 minutes later, the photos arrived. Clear images of bank statements, transaction records, and Richard's letter written in his distinctive handwriting. But there was one more document that Rosa had photographed, a handwritten list in Dominic's writing, dated just a week after Richard's death. It was a list of names. The Chen family was at the top. Below it, 19 other names, all with amounts next to them. At the bottom of the page, a total, $1,947,000. And then, in Dominic's handwriting, More than enough in the Cayman account to cover all of them. But Dad was right. If I give it away, I'll have nothing left from him except shame. V's parents will have to wait for the lawsuit settlement like everyone else. He'd known. From the very beginning, he'd known he had the means to help Vanessa's parents, to help all the remaining victims, and he'd chosen not to. He'd chosen to keep the money and blame me instead. I forwarded the photos to my lawyer with a message. We need to meet first thing in the morning. I know how to fix this. For the first time in almost 2 weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt angry. Not the helpless anger I'd been carrying, but a focused, purposeful anger. The kind that gets things done. My son wanted accountability. He was about to get it. Just not in the way he expected. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I worked. I called Martin Greenberg at 6 in the morning and told him everything. By 8, we had a plan. By 10, we had the documentation we needed. And by noon, I was ready to do something I should have done 13 years ago. Tell the complete truth, regardless of who it protected or exposed. Martin helped me draft a comprehensive document detailing everything. Richard's fraud, the settlements I'd made, the victims I'd found and compensated, the victims I hadn't known about, and now the discovery of the hidden Cayman account with $1.2 million that Dominic had known about for weeks while accusing me of abandoning the remaining victims. But I didn't want to just send Dominic a legal document. I wanted to face him. I wanted him to look me in the eye while I told him the truth, so I did something that terrified me. I organized my own meeting, and I invited everyone. I rented a conference room at a hotel in Westchester, neutral ground, close to Dominic's house. I had my lawyer send formal invitations to Dominic, Vanessa, and her parents. I also invited Miranda, who immediately booked a flight from Los Angeles, and I hired a professional mediator, someone who specialized in family conflicts and financial disputes. The invitation was simple: a meeting to discuss the full truth about Richard Roderfood's fraud, the settlements made, and newly discovered assets. All parties affected are encouraged to attend. Saturday, November 4th, 2 p.m. Dominic's response came 6 hours later. Just 2 words: I'll be there. The days leading up to that meeting were the longest of my life. I rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times. I prepared myself for Dominic's anger, for the Chen's pain, for the possibility that even the truth might not be enough to repair what had been broken. Miranda arrived Friday night. We had dinner in my hotel room. Neither of us had much appetite, and she held my hand while I cried for the first time since this whole nightmare began. What if he hates me anyway? I asked her. What if I show him the evidence and he still chooses to believe his father's version? Then at least you'll know you tried, she said. At least you'll know you told the truth. Saturday arrived cold and gray, the kind of November day that feels like the year is dying. I dressed carefully, my black Armani suit, pearls, minimal makeup. I wanted to look strong, in control, even though inside I was falling apart. The conference room was sterile and impersonal, which somehow felt appropriate. Large table, uncomfortable chairs, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Martin arrived first, carrying 3 boxes of documents. Then the mediator, a woman named Dr. Sharon Reeves, who had a calm, authoritative presence. Then Miranda, who sat next to me and squeezed my hand. At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened and Dominic walked in. I barely recognized my son. Rosa had been right. He'd lost a shocking amount of weight. His suit hung on him. His face was gaunt, with deep shadows under his eyes. His hair, usually impeccably styled, looked like he'd been running his hands through it obsessively. He looked like someone on the edge of collapse. Behind him came Vanessa, heavily pregnant and moving slowly. Her face was hard, closed off, and behind her, an elderly couple who could only be her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Chen. Both in their late 60s, dressed formally, their faces showing the kind of weariness that comes from years of struggling to rebuild what was stolen. Dominic's eyes met mine for just a moment, then slid away. He sat as far from me as possible. Vanessa positioned herself between us like a barrier. The Chens sat quietly, their hands clasped together on the table. Dr. Reeves introduced herself and explained the ground rules. Everyone would have a chance to speak. No interruptions, no personal attacks. The goal was understanding, not victory. Then she turned to me. Mrs. Roderfood, you called this meeting. Would you like to begin? I took a deep breath and looked directly at my son. Dominic, 13 years ago, I discovered that your father had been defrauding investors. It was the worst moment of my life. Not because of the money, but because I realized the man I'd married, the father of my children, was capable of destroying people's lives for his own gain. Dominic's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. I made a choice then. Maybe it was the wrong choice. I decided to handle it privately. I hired forensic accountants to identify every victim we could find. Over 6 months, I paid out $2.3 million from my own earnings to compensate 28 families. Each one signed a non-disclosure agreement because I wanted to protect you and your sister from the public shame of having a criminal father. I pulled out the first set of documents and slid them across the table. These are the settlement agreements, the bank records, the proof that I tried to make things right. Mr. Chen spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but firm. We were not on that list. No, sir, you weren't. And that is something I will regret for the rest of my life. My investigators only found victims who had filed complaints or threatened legal action. If you stayed quiet, whether from embarrassment or because Richard convinced you not to pursue it or for any other reason, you wouldn't have appeared on our radar. I looked at him directly. But I swear to you, I did not know about your loss. If I had, you would have been compensated. Vanessa made a sound of disbelief. How can we believe that? Dominic showed us the spreadsheet. Your spreadsheet. With my parents' name on it, marked Do Not Contact. That spreadsheet was created by Richard using my computer credentials. I never saw it until 2 weeks ago. I pulled out McCarthy's report. I hired an investigator to analyze the metadata. The spreadsheet was created on a day I was in Boston for a conference. My credit card records and emails prove I wasn't home. Richard created it to make me look complicit, to give himself insurance in case I ever thought about exposing him. I watched Dominic's face as I explained this. Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, maybe. Or hope. But here's what I learned 2 weeks ago that changes everything. I pulled out the photographs Rosa had sent me. Your father kept a secret account in the Cayman Islands. As of 4 days before he died, there was $1.2 million in that account. Money he stole and hid. Money that was never part of his estate disclosure. Money that could have compensated every remaining victim, including Mr. and Mrs. Chen. I slid the bank statements across the table. Dominic went pale. According to the letter your father left you, he told you to keep this money, to not let my guilt make you give it away to those people who came after him. Did he leave you that letter, Dominic? My son's hands were shaking. Yes. And did you know about this money for the past 6 weeks while you were planning to publicly humiliate me for not compensating all the victims? His voice cracked. It was my inheritance, from my father, the only thing he left me. It was stolen money, I said, and my voice was harder than I'd intended. It belonged to people like the Chens, who lost everything. You knew that. You knew you had the means to help Vanessa's parents, and you chose not to, while blaming me for the exact same thing. Vanessa grabbed Dominic's arm. You told me there was no money. You said your father died broke except for the condo. He wanted me to have something, Dominic said, and he sounded like a child trying to justify stealing cookies. After everything that happened, after the divorce, after watching him die alone in Florida, I deserved to have something from him that wasn't tainted by what he did. Except it was all tainted, Miranda said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was gentle but firm. Everything he left was tainted, Dom, because it was all built on lies and stolen money. There was never going to be a clean inheritance from Dad. Mrs. Chen had been silent until now, but she spoke in heavily accented English, her voice trembling. $400,000. My husband and I worked for 30 years. We sent our daughter to law school. We were going to retire. And then, it was all gone. We had to start over at 60 years old. Do you know what that is like? To be old and have nothing? Dominic looked at her, and I saw tears in my son's eyes for the first time. I'm sorry. Sorry is not enough, Mr. Chen said. You had money to help us. You chose not to help us. And then you blamed your mother for the same thing. I pulled out the final document, the one I'd had Martin prepare that morning. This is a proposal. I will petition the court to recover the $1.2 million from the Cayman account as part of Richard's estate that was fraudulently concealed. I will add $800,000 from my own assets. That's $2 million total. We will establish a victim restitution fund. Every remaining victim who can prove their loss will be fully compensated, with interest for the 13 years they've waited. I looked at the Chens. That includes you. You'll receive your $400,000 back, plus 13 years of interest at 5% annually. That's approximately $485,000. Mrs. Chen's hand went to her mouth. Her husband's eyes filled with tears. But there's a condition, I said, looking at Dominic now. You need to agree to this. You're the executor of your father's estate. You're the one who can authorize the recovery of that Cayman money. And you need to do more than just agree. You need to get help. Vanessa bristled. What do you mean, get help? Your husband has lost 20 pounds in 6 weeks. He's not sleeping. He's obsessing. Rosa told me he's having what looks like a breakdown. I softened my voice. Dominic, you're about to become a father. Your son needs you healthy, whole, not consumed by rage and grief and whatever else is eating you alive. I will fund the restitution. I will make sure every victim is compensated, but only if you agree to see a therapist. 3 times a week, minimum, until your therapist clears you. You can't blackmail me into therapy, Dominic said, but his voice was weak. I'm not blackmailing you. I'm setting a boundary. I will help these people. I gestured to the Chens, because it's the right thing to do, because I should have found them 13 years ago. But I won't watch my son destroy himself with misplaced anger and untreated grief. Your father is dead, Dominic. He can't hurt anyone anymore. But his poison is still working inside you, and if you don't deal with it, it's going to destroy your marriage, your relationship with your child, and whatever chance we have at repairing our relationship. The room was silent. Dr. Reeves, the mediator, spoke gently. Dominic, what your mother is describing sounds like complicated grief, combined with possible depression. It's not uncommon after losing a parent, especially when there are unresolved issues. Would you be willing to consider treatment? Dominic put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook. Vanessa looked at him with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern mixed with something else. Guilt, maybe. She'd been feeding his obsession, encouraging his anger. Maybe she was starting to see what it had cost him. I can't sleep, Dominic said finally, his voice muffled. I haven't really slept since Dad died. I keep having these dreams where he's trying to tell me something and I can't understand him. And then I wake up and I'm so angry. At him, at you, at myself. I don't know how to stop being angry. I wanted to go to him, to hold him like I did when he was small and had nightmares. But I stayed in my seat. That's what the therapist is for, sweetheart. To help you find a way through the anger. What if I can't? What if I'm too broken? You're not broken. You're hurt. There's a difference. I looked at Vanessa. Both of you are hurt, and you're hurting each other instead of helping each other heal. Mr. Chen spoke again, his voice surprisingly gentle. When we lost our money, I was angry for many years. Angry at Mr. Richard. Angry at ourselves for trusting him. The anger ate at me, made me sick, made me mean to my wife, who had done nothing wrong. Finally, my daughter, your wife, she made me see a doctor. He gave me medicine for the depression. It helped. I am still angry sometimes, but it does not control me anymore. Dominic looked at his father-in-law with something like wonder. You don't hate me? For keeping the money? I am disappointed, but you are my daughter's husband, the father of my grandchild. Hate is too heavy to carry. That's when Dominic finally broke. He put his head on the table and sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that sounded like they were being torn from somewhere fundamental. Vanessa wrapped her arms around him as best she could with her pregnant belly in the way. Miranda started crying. Even Martin, my lawyer who'd seen everything, looked moved. I sat very still, watching my son fall apart, and felt something shift in my chest. This was what needed to happen. The breaking open, the release. You couldn't heal what you wouldn't acknowledge was broken. Finally, Dominic raised his head. His face was blotchy and wet. I'll do the therapy. I'll sign whatever papers you need for the restitution fund. His voice broke again. I'll try to fix this, all of it. That's all I'm asking, I said softly. Dr. Reeves pulled out some forms. We spent the next hour going through the details. Dominic would sign authorization for the recovery of the Cayman funds. I would contribute my $800,000. Martin would establish the Victim Restitution Fund and begin contacting all known victims. Dominic would begin therapy within the week with a psychiatrist Dr. Reeves recommended who specialized in complicated grief. And then, when all the papers were signed and the Chens had left with promises that they would receive their compensation within 60 days, it was just family. Me, Dominic, Miranda, and Vanessa. "Mom," Dominic said, and his voice was small. "I'm sorry. For all of it. For believing the worst about you. For planning that dinner. For the messages. For everything." "I'm sorry, too," I said. "For keeping secrets. For thinking I could protect you from the truth about your father. For not being honest 13 years ago about why the marriage really ended. Can we?" He hesitated. "Can we try again? Start over?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. Could I forgive what he'd almost done? The humiliation he'd planned? The cruelty of those 47 messages? Then I looked at my son, really looked at him, at the grief and confusion and pain written all over his face, at the young man who'd lost his father and his faith in both his parents in the space of 6 months, at the father-to-be who was terrified he'd screw up his own child the way he felt screwed up. "We can't start over," I said. "We can't pretend none of this happened, but we can start from here, from truth, from honesty, from both of us trying to do better." He nodded. "From here, then." And it wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. It wasn't healing. Not yet. But it was a beginning. 3 months later, I held my grandson for the first time. Benjamin Richard Roterfood, they'd kept Richard's name, which I understood even if it hurt, was born on a snowy January morning, weighing 7 pounds and 3 ounces. He had Dominic's dark hair, and what looked like it might become Vanessa's delicate features. And when the nurse placed him in my arms, wrapped in a blue blanket with tiny elephants on it, something in me that had been clenched tight for months finally relaxed. "Hello, sweet boy," I whispered. "Your grandmother has been waiting to meet you." Vanessa was exhausted, but smiling from her hospital bed. Dominic stood next to me, his hand on my shoulder, the first time he'd voluntarily touched me since this whole nightmare began. He looked better. Still too thin, but the haunted look had faded from his eyes. 3 months of intensive therapy had started to do its work. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for being here. I wouldn't be anywhere else." Miranda arrived an hour later, having caught the red-eye from Los Angeles. She burst into the room with flowers and stuffed animals and the kind of chaotic energy that made everyone smile. "Let me see my nephew. Oh my God, he's perfect. He looks like a little old man. Dom, he has your grumpy face." We laughed. Actual, genuine laughter. It felt like a small miracle. Later that afternoon, when Vanessa was sleeping and Miranda had taken Dominic to the cafeteria to make sure he actually ate something, I sat in the chair next to the hospital bassinet and watched Benjamin sleep. His tiny chest rose and fell. His miniature hands curled into fists. He had no idea about the complicated, painful family he'd been born into. The grandfather who'd died in disgrace before he was born. The grandmother who'd spent millions trying to clean up his grandfather's mess. The father who'd nearly destroyed himself with misplaced rage and grief. All he knew was warmth and milk and sleep. And I envied him that innocence. The Victim Restitution Fund had been established in December. 23 families had come forward with proof of their losses. The Chens received their $485,000 2 weeks before Benjamin was born. Mrs. Chen had called me, crying, to say thank you. Mr. Chen had sent a handwritten letter expressing gratitude and, remarkably, forgiveness. "What your husband did was terrible," he wrote. "What your son did was wrong. But what you are doing now is right. Our family can finally move forward. We can retire. We can help our daughter and our grandson. You have given us back our future." That letter was framed on my desk now, next to a photo of Dominic and Miranda from when they were small. The process hadn't been easy. Some victims were angry that it had taken 13 years. Some questioned why they should have to prove their losses when the money had clearly been stolen. Some threatened lawsuits anyway, wanting not just their money back, but damages for the years of suffering. Martin handled it all with patience and professionalism, and slowly, one by one, the victims were compensated. The total came to just over $9 million, slightly less than we'd budgeted for, which meant the remaining $100,000 went into a fund for victims who might still come forward in the future. Dominic's therapy was ongoing. He'd been diagnosed with major depressive disorder with obsessive features, triggered by complicated grief over his father's death. The psychiatrist had prescribed medication and continued weekly sessions. It was working. Slowly, but it was working. He'd told me, during one of our careful, tentative dinners, about the night he'd planned to confront me, how he'd invited 15 of his father's victims, how he'd prepared a whole presentation with slides showing the evidence of my supposed complicity, how he'd been so certain that publicly forcing me to admit my guilt would somehow make everything make sense. "I thought if I could prove you were a bad person too, it would hurt less," he said. "Like, if both of you had betrayed me, then it wasn't personal. It was just what parents do. And now I understand that Dad was sick. Not mentally ill necessarily, but morally sick, corrupted by greed or ego or whatever. And you were just trying to protect us from his sickness. You made mistakes, but your intentions were good. That's the difference I couldn't see before." Vanessa had apologized too, in her own way. She'd invited me to lunch when she was 8 months pregnant and told me she was sorry for encouraging Dominic's worst impulses. "I was so angry about my parents," she said. "And when I found out you were involved, even tangentially, it gave me someone to blame who was still alive. Someone I could hurt the way my parents had been hurt. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. And it almost destroyed my husband. We all made mistakes," I told her. "The question is what we do now." What we did now was try to rebuild trust, try to communicate honestly, try to be a family, however imperfect. Rosa was working for me now, managing my household in Greenwich with a salary of $85,000 a year, full health benefits, and a retirement plan. She'd saved me from public humiliation and possibly saved Dominic from doing something he could never take back. That kind of loyalty deserved to be rewarded. She'd come to visit me at the hospital, bringing homemade Filipino pastries for Dominic and Vanessa. "The baby is beautiful," she said, peering into the bassinet. "He has good energy. He will be loved, thanks to you," I told her. "If you hadn't warned me that night, if I'd walked into that ambush, you would have survived," Rosa said firmly. "You are strong, but maybe the family would not have survived. Sometimes running away is the bravest thing." Miranda stayed in New York for a week after Benjamin was born. We had dinner together most nights, just the two of us, reconnecting after months of crisis. She told me about her design business in Los Angeles, about the boyfriend she was getting serious with, about her plans for the future. "Are you okay?" she asked me one night over Thai food in my hotel room. I still hadn't moved back to the house in Greenwich yet. "Really okay?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm relieved. I'm grateful we found a way through this, but I'm also sad. Sad about all the time we lost. Sad about what Dominic put himself through. Sad about the victims who suffered for 13 years. There's a lot of sadness underneath the relief." "That makes sense," she said. "You're allowed to feel both things." My relationship with Dominic was still fragile. We talked on the phone every Sunday. Careful conversations where we both tried too hard to be normal. We had dinner once a month, with Vanessa there as a buffer. We were learning each other again, like strangers who'd been told they used to be close and were trying to find their way back to that closeness. But holding Benjamin, watching Dominic watch his son with such fierce love and terror, I felt hope. Hope that this baby would be raised with more honesty than his father had been. Hope that we could break the cycle of secrets and lies that had poisoned my marriage and nearly destroyed my relationship with my son. "He's going to know the truth," Dominic said to me one day, about a week after Benjamin was born. We were at his house, sitting in the nursery while the baby napped. "When he's old enough to understand, I'm going to tell him about Grandpa Richard, about what he did, about how you tried to fix it, about how I almost made everything worse. I don't want him growing up with a sanitized version of our family history." "That's going to be a hard conversation," I said. "Yeah, but harder things happen when you keep secrets." He looked at me. "I learned that from you. Eventually. On my way out of the hospital, the day Benjamin was born, I ran into Mr. and Mrs. Chen in the elevator. They were coming to visit their grandson with an enormous gift basket. "Mrs. Roderfood," Mr. Chen said, and his face broke into a genuine smile. "We are family now. You and I, we are Benjamin's grandparents together." "Yes," I said, feeling tears prick my eyes. "We are." Mrs. Chen reached out and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for everything, for the money, yes, but also for helping our son-in-law get well, for bringing truth to light, for being brave." I didn't feel brave. I felt exhausted and relieved, and still a little broken, but I squeezed her hand back and said, "Thank you for your forgiveness. I didn't deserve it, but I'm grateful for it. Everyone deserves forgiveness who asks for it honestly," she said. "That is what we believe." That night, back in my hotel room, I finally called the real estate agent and told her to take my house off the market. I'd listed it a month ago, thinking maybe I couldn't live in Greenwich anymore, couldn't live with the memories of my marriage and my children's childhoods and all the secrets I'd kept in those rooms. But I was ready to go home now, ready to face the past and build something new from it. I had a grandson. I had a daughter who loved me unconditionally. I had a son who was learning to trust me again. I had victims who'd been made whole. I had Rosa, whose courage had saved us all. And I had myself, older, sadder, wiser, but still standing. The next morning, I drove to Dominic's house with a trunk full of baby gifts. When Rosa's warning had sent me fleeing from this driveway 3 months ago, I'd thought I was running away from danger. Now I understood I'd been running toward truth. And truth, as painful as it was, had set us all free. Benjamin was crying when I arrived. Dominic answered the door looking disheveled and exhausted and absolutely radiant. "Mom, thank God. We have no idea what we're doing. Can you?" "Of course," I said, taking my grandson from my son's arms. "That's what grandmothers are for." And as I settled into the rocking chair in the nursery, soothing Benjamin's cries with the muscle memory that comes from raising 2 children of my own, I realized this was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not vindication, not revenge, not even understanding. Just this, the chance to be part of my family's life, the chance to hold my grandson and teach my son how to be a father and build something good from the wreckage Richard had left behind. It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when this nightmare began, but it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.